I think today is, I guess we're in not Mountain Home. We're not in Mountain Home. We're in Caldwell, Idaho. And it is Tuesday. And I guess we're about 10 minutes to 7 in the evening. It's the 20th of June. And we're at Hugh and Gloria's place on Alder Street. And what's the address here right now?
1923 Alder Street.
1923 Alder. And you've been here about a year now? Or has it been a year yet?
We were moving in the last half of the year.
Okay. And but anyhow, you've been very busy. But my main purpose of doing a video is just to get some information about family history and stuff like that. And Gloria, I wanted to know if you could tell us a little bit about maybe siblings you may have had, a little bit about your parents, maybe about when they were born, roughly, maybe where they lived, kind of to begin with. And then maybe after a bit we can bounce to Uncle Hugh. He can kind of give me some ideas, or if you need to chirp in, either one of you can provide some answers if you don't know. But go ahead, Aunt Gloria.
Well, I was born in Fallon, Nevada. My father came from Spain in 1919. My mother came from Nebraska about 1930, and she was working in Fallon. My father after he came from Spain, he came on the ship to Ellis Island, and then on the train, and he went to Battle Mountain, Nevada to begin with. And then he went to work on a ranch that was closer, actually, about Dixie Valley or something. There was four boys that all came together. Actually, they came, my father's sister had gotten married in Spain, and her husband had found a place in America. So he went, and he left her with the children, the three children. And so it was during the Spanish-American War, wasn't what you call it? Spanish-American War.
Spanish Civil War.
And Civil War. And his parents knew that my dad was old enough that he would have to go into the army, so they encouraged him to come to America with his sister and the children. He thought he would go back, but he didn't go back at that time. So they got on a boat, big ship, and came to America, Ellis Island. Then they took the train to Nevada, and he went to work. But anyway, of these five boys accompanied them, each one of them settled in Fallon, Nevada. One became a bartender, the other one had a hotel, another one had a farm or ranch.
What were their names?
And Tommy Omrachia was the one that went out to the mountains with his cattle. He had sheep and cattle. And I'm trying to think. Ramon Arzabalaga, he had a hotel, and I don't remember the one that had the bar. It was bartender, but and then I'm trying to remember. I only have three of them right. But anyway, they all settled in different occupations, and my daddy came to Fallon, and at that time the bank. It was, might say, the beginning of the Depression era. And a lot of people had farms, and then they couldn't pay for them. And they had the cattle, so the bank would take the cattle. And then they would have to hire somebody to milk the cows and take care of the farm and everything. And so my dad, he got a position like that. He had a house to live in, and he had about 50 head of cattle that he raised, and the bank paid him for doing that work. And about that time, my mother was working in a restaurant in Fallon, and he would sometimes go to that restaurant and have his supper. And that was where he met my mother. And they got married in 1930, pardon me. 31 was it not? I don't remember for sure. They were married the same year as your folks were.
I think that was 19...
Because I was born in 33. And So it's probably about 1931, something like that. And so she went out, they moved to the ranch where my dad was working. And anyway, he was milking probably about, 10, 15 head of cattle for milk. And he would sell the milk just like you would say on a farm, a regular farm. But he had a calendar up on the wall that had all the name of all the cows. And when they were due and they were going to have their calves, he would write down Thelma, and then he'd say October something or January something. And she noticed when she was out there, they had all the name of these girls, but she didn't know what they were, but they were name of cows. And she wondered, what have I gotten myself into here? And so she asked him, what are all the names of these girls? He said, they're all my girlfriends. And that even made it worse. I mean, she was ready to leave right then and there. And so finally, then she realized that, I don't know whether he came out straight out and said, well, these are the name of my cows, and they're expecting their babies. But he would say the date, he would have the name, and then he'd have the cow, and then they'd have the date that supposedly they were supposed to have their calves on. So from that ranch, they moved to another ranch. It was a larger house, and he still was working for the bank. But it was a big house. I've seen the house. That was the house that I was born in. It was in the Beach District. And we stayed there until I was born there, and then we moved. When I was about 3 years old, we moved to the ranch that I grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was, it was probably, anyway, it was a larger ranch.
Mm-hmm.
It had about 180 acres. The other ones were probably about 20 or 15 acres.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the place that I grew up. And my mother had 2 older daughters. And so that made the 3 of us. And then my brother was born, and he was a twin.
What approximate years were you guys born again?
I was born in 1933. He was born in 1937.
Okay.
So, but it was a set of twins that were born, and one of them died. And
Your brother was a twin, or you were a twin?
My brother was a twin.
Okay.
Richard was a twin.
Okay.
And the one boy died, a set of boys. And then my sister Darlene was born in 1939.
Okay.
But we all grew up on that ranch, and we learned how to work. I mean, my dad had a lot of cattle, and we had to milk the cows when they'd be out haying. For the time I was probably maybe 10 years old, I mean, that was our job. Even though my dad, he had about, we could fill the barn. It was 20 or 30 cows, but we'd have to go out there. They had milk machines at that time. We used to have to strip them, to get the rest of the milk out. We took the milk, and we used the milk, and we separated the milk and the cream, and we sold the cream to the creamy man, I guess you'd call him. He came once a week, and would take the cream to town.
Did you know at all how your parents met?
All I know is she was working in a restaurant, and he came in to have something to eat, and that was when he.
Did you know any of her background, your mom's background?
So my mom, she was born in 1908, 1909, I guess it was 1909. And her father and mother, when she was almost 5 years old, they got a divorce. So her brother, her only brother, was born first, and then a girl whose name was Charlotte, and then Minnie, and then my mom was born. Well, she was the youngest, and because when her folks got a divorce, she was put out to an orphanage, and she grew up in the orphanage while the 2 older children stayed with her father, and the next one to her, he went to live with an old maid aunt. So she saw her father maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Maybe she'd spend maybe a week or so with him. And it wasn't a happy situation, I don't believe. And,
Yeah.
and I think she got a pretty good bringing up, because she worked on these farms where they taught them how to cook and to sew and to do the work, and probably a better education than your own sisters had it, because they were just really pressed to learn these things. They just sort of took care of themselves and their father. And my grandfather on my mother's side, he sold vegetables. He was a marketer. He would go down the street selling his groceries, or the market, the gardening materials.
And where was that?
That was in Nebraska, in Lincoln, Nebraska.
In Lincoln, Nebraska. Okay.
Lincoln, Nebraska. But she never met her mother, actually met her mother, until she was 18.
You're talking about your mom now.
I'm talking about my mom, never met her mother
Okay.
until she was about 18.
Okay.
And then at that time she was working in a Salvation Army's hospital. She had gone there when she was around 16. And that's where you might say she was a nurse that took care of little babies when they were first born. And she gradually learned more about nursing, I guess.
Sure.
And so then she came out on the train with her parents, or with her mother and her late husband, and they lived in Ely, Nevada.
Okay.
And then I guess Mama went to Fallon. I don't really remember why she went to Fallon for, but maybe the parents did. I don't know. All I know is that she ended up going to Fallon.
Sure.
And that's where she met my father.
Okay. Yeah, Uncle Hugh. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your parents, your grandparents, and if you know a little history of them. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your parents and grandparents, what you can tell me, and their siblings?
Well, my parents,
And maybe what year generally that you think they were born, or just a kind of approximation.
my dad was born in 1907
And his name is?
in Orville, Harden.
Okay.
And my mom, Lady Catherine Furry Harden, was born in 1931, or 1907 also. And Dad graduated from Sabetha High School, and
That's the one in Kansas?
yeah, Sabetha, Kansas. And,
Okay.
he played on a football scholarship at Tarkio College, and they lost every football game that they played, so he quit there and went to the University of Nebraska, and that's where he met my mom.
Okay.
And they were married in 1931, was it?
31.
Need to get the genealogy book out.
Uh-huh.
And this was in the middle of the Depression, and Dad, he had gone to Idaho in a Model T Ford with a flat crankshaft that he'd have to drop the oil pan and tighten the main bearing caps up every 50 miles, and
Oh my
he
word.
got pretty good at changing that oil pan. By the time
50 miles. Oh, that's not very far.
Anyway, he was 16 years old when he came to Idaho, and he lay on his back up in Riggins, Idaho, on the Little Salmon River. Or I guess that's where the Little Salmon and the Salmon River come together. But he laid on his back, looking up at the pack trail high on the mountain, with a pack string coming around on the trail, and he said he was going to be back to Idaho, and before he proposed to Mom, why, he had her promising that she'd go to Idaho with him, and they came to Idaho, but they had a hard time staying in Idaho. Dad worked in Washington Courthouse, Ohio, and all over the country with the government. He graduated from the University of Nebraska with a degree in agricultural economics. And he was within a thesis of getting his master's degree at Ohio State, or Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa.
Go ahead. Continue on.
But he didn't ever do his thesis. He worked for the government for a while, and he came, I remember living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Roswell, New Mexico, and Amarillo, Texas. I remember a picture of Stephen's father and myself in the yard in Amarillo. Amarillo is still a pretty small town in the panhandle of Texas. And Phoenix, Arizona, Dad wasn't impressed with the government service. He went to a plumbing trade school in Phoenix, Arizona, and I remember seeing a picture of the buddy trailer they had in Flagstaff, Arizona, and it was surrounded by many feet deep of snow. I can imagine that was a cold winter. Maybe they got caught in a blizzard in transit, I don't know. But they were back in Idaho in 1941. In 1940, we lived in Blackwell, Oklahoma, and that's where Harvey was born.
When was Hal?
I don't remember when Hal was born. I don't even remember when Harvey was born, but that's where he was born.
There were 6 boys born and 5 that lived to adulthood.
The first one they had.
So we had Dwayne that died, and Hugh and Hal, and was it Harvey, and then Quentin, and then Orville.
Yeah.
Okay. And what history do you know of your mom, and even your dad or your grandpa on your dad's side or your mom's side?
Well, my grandmother Harden, my father's mother, she was a Belk, and it was the
And what was her first name?
Cora Ann
Belk
Harden.
Okay.
She married John William Erastus Harden, my grandfather.
You have an idea when that happened?
I've never been able to find a marriage certificate
Okay.
on them. I don't know whether they had a church wedding or what.
Okay.
But anyway, they got married and stayed married their entire life.
Uh-huh.
And
She died.
yeah, she died in Nampa, Idaho.
Your grandpa died the year before we were married.
Yeah, my grandpa Harden, he died the year before we were married.
Which would have been in 1955.
You got married in 55?
We got married in 1957.
Okay.
He died.
So he died just a little
55 or
bit.
56 anyway.
And
Yeah.
they lived in Springfield, Missouri. then.
This was your grandpa.
My grandpa Harden,
Okay.
and
And he ran a tire shop.
he had a sister that married a prior, and I've been in contact with a grandson of Myrtle Harden Pryor, Wayne Pryor, and visited the graveyard in Spokane. I guess they call it Spokane, Missouri,
Okay.
south of Springfield,
Uh-huh.
and that's where my grandmother and grandfather are buried. And Wayne, there's a lot of relatives in that graveyard. Some kind of a cousin, Wayne Pryor, could tell me who was who if I'd been there with him at the time.
We met him for the first time at that time. He rode back and forth to Hugh.
Okay.
And then he said, well, I'll meet you at the
Cracker Barrel in
Cracker Barrel.
Springfield.
Okay.
We said, now what are we looking for? We didn't have a picture of him or anything like that. We just got out of the car and just kind of wandered around, and all of a
toward
sudden I
each
said, well, how
other,
about
and
this man over here? And sure enough, it was him, and we had no idea it was him. It was just
Yeah.
we spent the whole afternoon with him.
Sure. And what can you tell me about your mom's side of the family?
well, Mom's parents were Pennsylvania Dutch, which means they were Pennsylvania Deutsch, German extraction in Pennsylvania, and I don't know where they were married offhand, whether it was Pennsylvania or Nebraska, but anyway, they went to Nebraska, and Mom graduated from Riverside High School, which was probably near Lexington.
That's in Nebraska then?
Central Nebraska.
Okay.
And then she took nurses training in Lincoln, Nebraska, and she was working at the orthopedic hospital in Lincoln when my dad met her. Now, Dad had been raised Church of God Seventh Day, and Mom had been raised Church of the Brethren, some kind of a Baptist Protestant grouping.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, Mom met Adventist people in Lincoln there, and so Mom got to go into the Adventist church, and Dad...
The Adventist church, was it an Adventist hospital?
Well, no, the orthopedic hospital was a state hospital.
Okay, all right. I'm
Uh-huh.
sorry.
And Mom had taken some of her training in Cook County Hospital in Chicago. I probably should read some of Mom's
But anyway,
diaries to get some of this straight. Trying to recall it from memory
Yeah, well, that's okay.
is difficult.
So what?
But anyway,
Go ahead.
living in different places like Blackwell, Oklahoma, there wasn't many Adventists, and there wasn't many Church of God people, and so Dad was hosting Sabbath keepers in his home of various extractions,
Uh-huh.
and most of the time when I was growing up, we attended the Adventist church, but we visited the Church of God Seventh Day, a little group in Meridian, Idaho, quite often, and I was always impressed with that little group.
Uh-huh.
It's a much bigger group now. They have a worldwide work and out of Meridian, Idaho, and the Church of God people, they had trouble getting along. I guess they get splintered up pretty good, but God's church has certain boundaries, and He knows the boundaries. Us humans, we sometimes don't get along, but God knows the heart, knows the boundaries of His church.
Tell them about when you moved to Idaho, to actually Boise.
Pardon?
Eagle. I said, do you want to tell them about when you moved to Eagle, or in Meridian, pardon me?
Well, when we came back to Idaho, last time that I remember, we lived in Meridian, Idaho, in a trailer court. Or no, we lived in a house, and I started the first grade in Meridian school. It was a 8-room, 2-story brick school, and that was when Meridian had one school, and we lived in a house across from Meridian Avenue, across from Davis Grocery, and we got quarantined. They said we had scarlet fever, and Mom, a nurse, didn't think we did, but anyway, we were quarantined, and Dad couldn't live with us. He was staying in the house, I guess, and the rest of the family was in this motel. They called it a cabin camp back then, and we were quarantined for about 6 weeks, and then this.
Approximately when would that have been?
Probably in 1940, 41.
And you were born about what year again?
I was born in 1934, and
About 8 or 9.
I started the first grade in Meridian, and then I was in the first grade at the old Garfield School in South Boise off of Broadway Avenue, and that was another 2-story
It's still there.
school. That school, it was across the street, across Boise Avenue from the existing school, which was maybe a junior high back then. And I know we used to go from the 2-story school where I was in the first grade over to this other school across the street for music classes. And Dad was working in the plumbing trade then, probably for Lessinger Plumbing, and we lived there in South Boise. I forget the name of the street, but this was when the Second World War broke out, and I remember having to put up blackout curtains for the blackouts, the air raid sirens would tell you had to
Get in your house.
seal your house from all light. And And then we moved to the farm out south of Meridian on Victory Road, which is kind of a fancy upbuilt area now. And I went to Amity School when Amity School was a two-room country school. We walked 1.5 miles to school. They didn't have school buses back then. And even when after we sold that place and moved to Emmett, I was in 4th grade when we moved to Emmett, and Dad had a 120-acre place with a whole bunch of river frontage. If it had just kept that place, it'd have probably done all right. And Dad was running a wagon plumbing shop out of the back of his pickup, doing plumbing work, and then he got a chance to buy Greenlee Plumbing out in Boise, and that was at 2201 Main Street, right across 22nd Street from the downtowner.
Across the old fairgrounds.
And so he was operating as Greenlee Harden Plumbing, and this is awful rambling.
Okay, how long did he keep that one? He kept that one.
And we went to
there you build the house into.
Dad was commuting from Emmett for a long time up the old freeze-out hill, going to work at 2201 Main Street, Boise. And after a few years of that commute, when Grandpa and Grandma Harden came out to visit, Dad had them scouting out farms in the Boise Valley to get closer to his work, and they bought 160 acres on old Highway 55 across from the Floating Feather Airport, and it had a 2-story house, and we lived in that for a couple of years, and then Dad built the house where we lived when Gloria and Maureen and Pat married some Harden brothers, and then Dad moved his plumbing shop. He sold 2201 Main Street and moved out on the bench on Fairview Avenue, where Boise Stone and Tile is now, and had a plumbing shop. At one time, Dad had about 22 plumbers working for him, and he had a high pressure situation going, and then he got into the well drilling business, and he liked the well drilling business because he didn't have to deal with so many customers in a year. So he sold the plumbing business and got into well drilling entirely, and I graduated from Boise Junior Academy, 10th grade, and then I went to Boise High for the last 2 years of high school, when Boise High was the only high school. And then I went to Walla Walla College, where I met my wife,
Uh-huh.
but this was a few years later. After my freshman year, I volunteered for the draft and decided to get the Army out of the way, and went to Camp Fort Lewis, Washington, and then to Camp Pickett, Virginia for medical training, and then I got sent to Fort Meade, Maryland, and then to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey for shipment to Germany. And I spent a year and a half in Germany, I guess, in Augsburg, Martin Luther's old stomping ground. I used to think more highly of Martin Luther than I do now. After having read more of his writings, I don't consider him a man of God at all. But anyway, after I got out of the Army, why, I bought a Volkswagen in Germany, my first car, paid $895 US for a brand new 1955 Volkswagen export model, and drove it to Italy and Switzerland and Holland and Belgium and Luxembourg. And I didn't go to France. I didn't think I wanted to bother with France. But then when I got out of the Army, why, I drove the Volkswagen, and another sergeant up to get his car at Bremerhaven, and I rode back with them and left my Volkswagen at the port there in Bremerhaven to be shipped to Brooklyn, New York. And so anyway, when I picked up my Volkswagen in Brooklyn, we drove, I drove across Pennsylvania and met a girl in Hinsdale, Illinois that I'd been writing to. And then I took Highway 66, Route 66 to Springfield, Missouri, and picked up Grandma and Grandpa Harden and took them to Idaho via Nebraska, and we stopped in Overton, Nebraska, and both sets of my grandparents got to meet each other for the first time. Grandpa.
Was this girl you went to meet the one that you have sitting next to you, or was this somebody different?
The what?
Was this girl that you talked about you went to meet
In Hinsdale, well.
Was this the lady that's sitting next to you, or was this somebody else?
No, this, she didn't rate high enough, and then
Okay.
I'd been writing to another girl.
She didn't rate high enough to you or to your relatives, or both?
Pardon?
She didn't rate high enough to you, or not to your, or not high enough to your relatives, or the whole all of you?
Oh no, she had never met any of the other family.
She didn't think you was.
I've been writing to her when I was in the Army in Germany, and
Mm-hmm.
I've been writing to another girl in Missouri that was near Grandma and Grandpa's, and I met her, and
Funny how
nothing
things get to
clicked
the picture.
there, and so anyway, it
So
was
those things didn't.
Grandma and Grandpa
Kinda-
and I headed for Idaho via Nebraska, and then I picked up Walla Walla College after the summer and continued on GI Bill.
What did you take in school? What
Oh, I
what
was-
major?
I
Or?
was taking engineering,
Okay.
mechanical engineering,
Okay.
and
What year in school did you meet Gloria?
well, I met her probably January of my junior year, was it? 19,
We were in 57, so 56. It was, I think it was on November of 55.
Where did you notice her at?
well,
Or did she notice you and just kind of put little hints in your ear?
I'd I was going to ask another girl to go to the band concert or whatever the program was, and she wasn't in. I had dated a lot of other girls before I met Gloria. Anyway, this girl wasn't in, and Gloria was there at the desk, and so I asked her for if she'd like to go to the band concert.
I think the second time you came back.
Yeah, that was probably the second time.
We'll stop this temporarily.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Meeting.
You were talking about
Yeah,
meeting Gloria at the desk when somebody else did a no-show on you or something. And so Gloria was at the desk and continue on.
Yeah, so I asked her to go, and that probably was
Well, you came back
the
the
future
second
date.
time. You came back a second time. You asked, and then the next day or something, you came back again, and the lady wasn't, and the girl still wasn't there. So you asked me.
So,
And after that, we went together all the rest of the time. Went.
yeah. And
Is this selectively forgetting this section, or is it just that you're not able to remember it? Or it's better not to remember it right now, as far as the details.
It's all above board. It's
Or is this where most people will be tuning in? Maybe this would be the part where people will be repeatedly watching to clarify details.
Let's see.
And what did we
We
say?
dated all fall, and then that year, and then
We went into the, about
then
June.
summer,
You two.
I came to Fallon to visit your folks.
What's going on?
We'll turn this off for just a second.
Anyway, he met me.
On a more fun note, I think you were talking about going for an inspection at her parents' house. Was that it? Were you under the inspection at this point?
Gloria had a 49 Ford, and I think I rode with her to Fallon and met your folks and
Did you pass inspection?
proposed marriage, and
Well, not then. You came back in July to ask me to marry you. We were only engaged a month
we were only engaged a month.
a month and a half. We were
Oh.
married, it was the 4th of July, you came, and we got married the last of August.
And Gloria, did your parents give him
They
thought he was a
thought he
decent
was
type of
right.
person?
He did.
Okay, so he passed their inspection.
He passed. He
Okay.
just learned what kind of a girl I really was. You know,
Okay.
He got a farm girl, I wasn't getting a,
You weren't getting a
City.
city slicker, highfalutin,
city.
high tutu, high
and
maintenance, whatever.
he used to, after when we were going together, he used to always come down and meet me, would walk me down to, I was at the demonstration school, and he would walk down there, or would you come and get me? I've forgotten.
Where was this school at?
This was at Walla Walla.
Okay. What were you taking in school, Aunt Gloria?
I was teaching.
Okay, you were teaching.
Education.
Okay.
Anyway, he came and the day that he proposed, he came on the 4th of July, or thereabout anyway, and we went on they had sort of a church get-together out at Lahontan Dam,
Okay.
and they had a big bonfire where they were roasting and stuff, and we were playing in the water and out of the water, and all of a sudden they were stirring the big fire, and
Coal jumped out of the barrel that they were stirring and flew up and went down her bra.
I
Oh!
have the scars.
Oh shoot! A coal went down your bra. This is a.
Like a swimming pool, like a
Ooh.
swimming suit almost, and it just right in there, and of course he didn't know what
Branded you.
branded me for life. So and he just threw, I don't know, he threw me in the water, or I jumped in the water, and then my mother, she was working at a hospital at the time, and so we went there, and of course, they took care of it. It was just as well as going to a doctor, because and then that very night, we went to, my folks used to live not very far from the
Naval Air Station.
Naval Air Station.
And what town was that again? Fallon.
Fallon.
Okay.
And we went out to look at the airplanes, and was that when you asked me? I forgot.
Well, we rode around some, but I asked you to marry me in your backyard there, sitting in the car.
And did you get a reply at that point, or did she say she'd think about it?
Well, she said yes. She didn't string me along, and she hasn't strung me along either since.
So he went home on the bus. No, you drove one that 4th of July one.
Yeah,
The other one you went home on the bus.
Yeah, the first time I went home on the bus.
Anyway, we had a very short courtship, so to say. He wrote letters on, he was working as a surveyor, and you know how the tapes, you have the tapes, and he would write letters on the tape, and then he'd send them to me. And I had them up until, I might even still have them, I don't know. I don't think I do, but
So what year did you guys get married again? Was it 57?
1957.
57.
Your folks got married a year later.
58, yes. And
well,
where are some places that you have been married, that you have moved to and lived since you've been married? And what kind of jobs have you done during that time period?
Well,
he graduated he was a junior that year, so we got married and we went to Walla Walla. We had an apartment, the same apartment that your folks lived in.
Hal and Warren Harden are my parents. But okay, go ahead.
And we lived in Mrs. Forsher was the name of the lady, and she had a 2-story house, and we lived upstairs. She lived downstairs, and Hugh was finishing up school. I was working.
What kind of work were you doing? Were you teaching at this time?
Well, I
you
did
were doing
end up.
substitute teaching.
Okay.
I went to work at a restaurant to begin with when we first went there, and then I got a job, substitute teaching. And anyway, Hal and Maureen moved in. When we moved out after graduation, they moved in to the same apartment.
So after you guys got married, what year did you finish your schooling, Aunt Gloria?
Well, actually,
She finished her schooling before. I guess you were taking a few classes after we
I
were
was taking
married.
a few.
But
I was on a 2-year credential.
she
Okay.
basically put me through school.
Okay, and then your schooling was done when, Uncle Hugh?
I graduated in 1958.
Okay. And after you guys got done with all your schooling,
Then
You're-
I went to work for General Electric, and my first assignment was at Hanford, Atomic Products Operation. And then I went to,
Cincinnati.
that was in the summer, and then we went to San Jose, California, and I was working for GE.
Atomic Lab.
Fuels and Materials Lab or something down in San Jose. And then I had an assignment out at Walnut Creek.
And then we moved back to
And
Cincinnati.
then,
No, we went back.
that was
Then
where
we went
Lorinda
back.
was born. And
Then we went back to San
who was born there?
Lorinda was born in San Jose when we lived in Castro Valley.
So about what year was she born?
1959.
59, okay.
And
Then we went back to
went to
Richland, back to Richland, then to Cincinnati.
finished the A course with GE, and on the B course, while I was at Cincinnati, the Flight Propulsion Laboratory Department, and then I went to,
We lived there 4 months, August, September, October.
then I transferred to the Knowles Atomic Power Laboratory in Schenectady, which is next door to GE's research lab. And David was born in Schenectady.
Okay, that's your oldest son, and about what year?
1961.
61, okay.
And
We lived in Richard Street there.
then we lived in town there, and then we bought a place out, 40 acres in the old two-story farmhouse that dated back to the War of 1812.
A real pretty house.
What state and what town was that in
Well,
again?
that was,
Saratoga.
it was north and, a little bit north and west of Schenectady, Boston. No, it was, oh, I forget the,
And what state was that again?
New York.
New York, okay.
And I guess I had about as wild hairs as my father had. So we hadn't been in this place that we bought too long, and decided to go back to Idaho and go well drilling. So we
Had your dad encouraged you along that, or you just decided you were interested on your
Well,
own, or?
he encouraged it. We had an interest in some desert entries that we were working on, and
What does that mean?
our family had filed on 1,920 acres of
Desert land.
desert land. Dad and Mom and Gloria and me and Hal and Maureen all filed desert entries.
So what does that mean when you file a desert?
Well,
entry?
each family, it's similar to the Homestead Act. The Homestead Act, you could file on 160 acres, and you had to build a home on it and live on it. And
Okay.
a desert entry, each couple could file. Each person could file 320 acres. A couple could file for a section. And you didn't have to necessarily build a home on it, but you had to develop the water supply and
Okay.
irrigate it and prove up on it. And we drilled some wells and test pumped them, and
Spent a year there.
And about that time, Dad got the wild hair to go to Canada.
So what happened with those test holes and that property?
Well, we assigned them to another person. We threw all the water we had developed into one desert entry, and that's the one they proved up on. And Warren even had to meet me in Reno, Nevada to
Signed the papers.
sign some paperwork where we were signing it over to this other party. So we basically,
Did you make any money on that, or
No,
did you
we-
lose money, or was it just an adventure,
it
or
was, you'd say you lost money on it. Yeah. We're going back and forth, making trips and drilling wells. And
Raising kids.
so you
it was interesting anyway.
so you had two other children besides the
Had
ones that were
three.
mentioned.
By
You
that
had
time, Becky had been
you had
born.
talked about a Lorinda and a David, and then you had
Yeah,
Becky.
Becky-
And when was she born, and where were you living at that time?
Well, we was living on Highway 55, just north of the dad's old
Okay.
place.
And then you had a fourth, Talitha. Where
Talitha wasn't born until,
where were you
Yeah.
living, and what were you doing when Talitha was born?
Well, when Talitha was born, I was down in Nevada working for Anderson and Kelly, engineering geological consultants for Foot Mineral Company. And that project is still in the news, lithium, with all the lithium ion batteries that are being needed now, and Elon Musk's gigafactory north of Reno and everything. Why, they're needing all the lithium they can get. So anyway, I was with Anderson and Kelly, and we were consulting for Foot Mineral Company. They were headquartered back in North Carolina. They were a lithium outfit from, they had their mining projects in North Carolina was spodumene, a lithium ore. But out in Silver Peak, Nevada, it was a solar evaporation project. They'd drilled all these brine wells, and they'd pump this brine out into a 500-acre pond, and then they'd evaporate it and concentrate it and send it into the next pond and concentrate it some more. And so after they concentrated it about 20-fold, as I recall, they'd send it up to the mill and dry it out and turn it into lithium carbonate, turn it from lithium chloride into lithium carbonate.
So how did you end up getting to Mountain Home and getting into the drilling business in that location?
Well, after Dad went to Canada and after the consulting job,
You had mentioned when he was going up there, he had the harebrained idea. What comes to your mind to imply of it being a harebrained idea, for example?
Grandpa encouraged us to come out.
after we got out here, then Dad wanted to go to Canada. And,
So you just came back here to work with him, and
yeah,
then he takes off to another country.
yeah,
Okay, all right. Just checking.
yeah.
That's it.
I was drilling on the desert entry and also doing other custom drilling in Nevada with Dad's rig, and
And we were living out of a little
had
trailer.
taken a little rig to Canada, and so anyway, Dad eventually got S-32 Walker Near up to Canada after he'd got all his horses and other stuff up there. Well, maybe he didn't have horses at that time. I don't remember.
He did.
But I think he did.
So you ended up being in this area, and how did you arrive at being a mountain home versus anywhere else?
I was living in Boise, and I was
You were
working for
We never
Trust Joyce Western. I was the plant engineer for Trust Joyce Western for a while when they were headquartered in Boise. And then I got laid off there after a while, and so I was selling disability insurance, and then I got a chance to work for Mountain Home Well Drillers. Dad was in Canada, and I could have gone up and worked for him, but I was working for Mountain Home Well Drillers, and I worked for Mountain Home Well Drillers until he sold out to Bill Gailey. And I worked for Bill Gailey for 6 months or a year, I don't remember which. And then Dad wanted me to come up and double shift with him on a deep subdivision well at Terrace. So I went up there and worked on that subdivision well one winter. That was winter of 76, 75, 76. And then when that job was over, I went back and worked for Bill Gailey. And then Dad wanted me to buy him out, and he made me an offer that I couldn't resist, so I mortgaged my place. And well, I worked from Boise to Mountain Home for 5 years before I moved to Mountain Home. I'd go down Sunday afternoon and spend the week living in the camper and drilling, and go home for the weekend, and did that for about 5 years before I moved to Mountain Home. And F.H. Bradbury, the owner of Mountain Home Well Drillers, offered to sell me 40 acres, and it sounded like a good deal. $200 an acre for 40 acres.
How much was it again?
$200 an acre. So we bought a double-wide mobile home and moved it out there in the middle of January. That was the cold, icy winter when your folks were going back to Africa. I forget, 76, you were headed for Sierra Leone,
We
went
to Sierra Leone in 72.
So
Came back in 75. Went to Ghana around 69. Actually, I think we went there in 67. Came back around 69. So those are a couple of the places.
Anyway, your folks were headed for Africa, and they drove to Mountain Home. And I guess we said goodbye in Mountain Home, and they headed on up for Montana and points east, and
Scott was just a baby.
Yeah. So you lived in Mountain Home beginning.
Yeah, from 76 to...
Ethan was born in Mountain Home.
No, that was 73 when we moved to Mountain Home. It was 76 when I bought Dad out.
Okay.
And then I started my own drilling business in Mountain Home.
Okay.
And
So you were doing the drilling for many years, and you've been around for a number of years. If you let's start with Gloria.
We lived there in Mountain Home for 44 years.
44 years, a lot of years. Yeah, as you look back.
Gloria went back to teaching.
Gloria, you were teaching. Did you teach most of those years? And
Was Talitha? Yeah, Talitha was in school. Talitha was in the second, third grade.
did you teach in Mountain Home mostly, or Aunt Gloria, or did you go other places as well?
Not home.
Yeah, she taught at she worked at the air base. Worked under a principal that later became the superintendent of schools for Mountain Home School District 193. She worked for a bunch of different principals down there. One of the persons she worked for became the state superintendent of education.
The one that is in now is the state superintendent.
Okay. And then, Gloria, if you look through your life so far, what are some things that you look back at now and you think they were maybe funny, but they were anything but funny, or maybe they were just plain stressful at the time? What are some examples? Maybe it happened to your parents or yourself and your kids. Just some things that now maybe seem either funny or something like that. But you have some situations.
When we first moved to Mountain Home, we had 30 head of sheep. And each one of the kids had a week that they would herd the sheep. They could take the sheep anywhere they wanted to, or I mean they could do anything they wanted to. They had to keep a hold of the sheep, to watch the sheep. They could take their blankets, they could take their books, but they just had to keep an eye on the sheep. And poor Becky hated it with a passion. And this one morning I got up in the morning and Becky wasn't in bed. And Talitha at that time was 5 years old. And I said, "Where's Becky?" And she said, "Mama, she's out with the sheep." I said, "Oh my goodness." So I went out and I said, "Honey, you don't have to be out here this time of day." And again, she said, "I want to get the whole thing over with."
She stayed out all night?
No, she went early in the morning.
Oh, okay.
But it was probably maybe an hour later. So we kept the sheep until Talitha was, I don't know, 5th grade, something like that, because we still had the animals when I was teaching school. When Talitha was 2nd or 3rd grade was when I went back. But I think mostly it's just that living in the country did teach our kids responsibilities, and it's just, I don't think Lorinda would be what she is now if she hadn't lived on a farm, or really had to work. Well, I think all of us, Becky hated the garden work. They liked to plant their garden. I mean, they liked to plant the flowers and everything else, and they liked that. They used to like to ride the bicycles and everything, but it was a challenge, I think. But they all grew up on the farm, so to say, on the ranch, and from the time we moved there until Lorinda was in 7th or 8th grade, and we were still living there when her kids. Oh, we always just lived there. That's all.
Yeah.
So, but I think all in all, it was probably, I saw the results of having to work and just the basics.
And Hugh, do you have any events specifically, or a couple of things that may seem funny now that weren't at the time? From your perspective, do you have any things that might have happened growing up, or in your taking care of your kids, a couple of experiences that might have happened that you think they're kind of funny now, but you didn't think so at the time?
Well,
Anybody sneaking smokes behind the woodshed or anything of that sort?
Never had
well,
that. When you were a little boy.
I was lucky to have a tough-minded dad like I had.
I heard a story one time about somebody that got caught smoking behind the shed, and they ended up having to start working on a whole pack or carton of cigarettes.
Yeah, I smoked till I was green in the feet.
So that was
we
you?
Was living, yeah, that was me. We was living in Craig, Colorado. I was about in the 3rd grade, 4th grade. Well, 2nd and 3rd grade, actually. I did 2 grades in 1 year down there. Yeah, this neighbor kid and I, we bought some cigarettes at the gas station, and we couldn't keep them lit. And Mom saw us playing with tobacco, and she told Dad. And so Dad, he had us smoking until we were good and sick. And
I had heard something about going and getting a carton and have you work on them until you pleaded uncle or something.
Then after that session, well, I told this Dick Graves or whatever his name was, I can keep them lit now. I ended up having to go through a second session. I thought I was going to die.
Now, did Grandpa go down and get a whole carton or something, or is that just a hearsay?
Well, no, it wasn't a carton. It was probably a couple of packs, whatever it took to keep an adequate supply. Anyway, there was no gradual approach to that. That was conversion therapy for sure.
So I had heard a rumor that you guys had to keep smoking until you basically begged to stop. Is that true or not?
Well, Dad was the judge of how sick we were, I guess.
Okay.
We
So
survived.
that one has a fairly strong element of truth to that one, and I've heard over the years.
I think Hal, your father, had to go through a session when we lived at Emmett. I think he did his session in Emmett.
Yeah. What are some things that if you had to do them a little differently that you would have done differently in your experiences? Do you have any special examples that you might have done a little differently for either one of you?
Well, drilling will keep you humble.
Okay.
There's always a chance for a rock to come in and hang you up. Mountain home was rock drilling, but rock isn't homogeneous and isotropic. It doesn't have uniform properties. And a chunk of rock will break out of the wall and hang you up, and then you gotta string up your bump bar and bump yourself loose. And you can...
I think it really trains you to be honest. And that is a big thing. I mean, I think if you were to talk to anybody, he was always honest with the people that he worked with.
Mm-hmm.
And other people wanted the money right on the button, and we were willing to kind of string them along, and yet they would pay us, and
Yeah.
God blessed us in other ways. I think that was a big thing. I think it taught our kids,
Right.
to be.
Yeah, I'm trying to make up for lost time now. I'm trading stock options and so on, and
Well, maybe we don't want to give
Doing
too many
a lot
private
of-
points on this video, but what are some recommendations that you make for your friends or your family that you would like to share? What are some thoughts? Gloria, what are some thoughts that come to your mind on things you might want to say to your family or just your friends? Just a few words of thoughts.
I think anything is honesty and to work hard and be true to God. I mean, I think that's a blessing that we've had, is that our kids are all good kids. They love God. They want to do the right thing. We can make mistakes, but still, God does bless, and He gives you a long life.
Do you have special recommendations for maybe some people that are not even born right now that might see this in the future?
And to see your great grandchildren love you and are good parents. Their parents are good parents. I think Kimberly and Kyle are real good parents. They have 2 little ones, and they're good parents. And I think that Jim and Gina are trying very hard too. And yet it's not us alone, I think. Sometimes it's the parents, but it takes 2. You may be our children, but they also have married, supportive mates that want their children to do the right thing.
Hugh, what recommendations or what comments would you make for
Well,
family or friends that might see this?
I would say, as parents, the best thing parents can teach their kids is they don't always get their own way. In other words, cross them up once in a while, like your grandpa did you.
Yes.
Yeah, he did.
And
It is funny when you think back. I remember when Orville was in the 7th or 8th grade, he went to the Eagle School, 7th Avenue School, and he would ride his bicycle, and then he would come back. By the time he got to our place, he was tired, so he'd always stop to see the kids. I mean, they were little, and so we always would have cookies or something like that. And they thought the world of him. They'd watch for him to come just like little dogs. And as soon as they'd see him coming, then they'd run down by the highway or by the road going by. And so he would come in and play with them and eat cookies with them and everything. And it was a message that they had.
sure.
And they were something that you.
Yeah,
I do think that's
knowing
true.
knowing your ancestries and your family's pretty important. You know what the genetics are. You can understand some of your descendants from knowing your forebears.
Mm-hmm. All right.
About this card that Caden sent.
Okay.
Where'd you put it at, Hugh? Oh, here it is. It says,
Yeah.
we love mushroom in a, what was this now? We have a
We have so much room in our hearts for a fungi like you. Mushroom fungi.
Uh-huh.
a fun guy.
Fungi like you.
We have so much, but she spells, instead of saying much, she says mushrooms.
Mushroom. We have mushroom in our hearts for a fungi like you.
A fun guy
Yeah.
like you. We have so
Yeah.
much mushroom.
Yeah, family's a blessing.
And I have an extra request. Aunt Gloria, would you be willing to have a short prayer? And after that, Uncle Hugh. And we'll probably wind this up for this time. But appreciate you being able to share for this video. And Aunt Gloria, would you have a prayer for us, please?
Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the privilege of being able to relate in our minds and our hearts, our lives. I pray that you would please be with all others in our family, that you would guide them and help them in raising their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And we pray that we may stay well and live long lives, and where we're tired and sometimes our bones are not as strong as they should be, and our hearts are not pumping as fast, our memory is not always the best, but we do pray that you'd please bless us and help us to make good decisions in our lives and to help others and forgive us where we fall short. Help us to do our best. And we do thank you very, very much for all the blessings you've given to us and our family and our families that we grew up with. Help them every day also. And thank you again for every blessing. We ask in thy name, amen.
Holy Father, eternal righteous God, thank you for your fabulous creation and for family and the privileges you give man. And we thank you for your eternal plan that was established before the foundation of the earth even. We thank you for your church, and you know the boundaries of it, and you know who are yours, and we just pray that you would work your will among men and come quickly and establish your kingdom. This world certainly does need right government, and we just commit our lives into your care, and thank you for what you're working out here below, and we look forward to your return in power and glory. These things we thank you for and ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.